Belarus' first Deputy Defense Minister, Pavel Muraveiko, has said that Belarus will use non-strategic nuclear weapons if its sovereignty and independence are jeopardized. Now, Belarus doesn't have nuclear weapons of its own. Now, it's important to note here that Russia parked several of its nuclear weapons in Belarus last year, a fact which was confirmed by the Belarusian President in April. Now, to discuss this further, we're joined by Diesen, who's a professor of international relations, University of Southeastern Norway. Glenn, always a pleasure speaking with you. Welcome to WION. Muraveiko, the first Deputy Defense Minister, as I mentioned earlier, and he said, and I'm going to quote him here, "We have learned how to handle these weapons. We can use them confidently." Is he, in fact, referring to the nuclear weapons parked by Russia in Belarus?
Well, yes, it would appear so. And I think this is part of the increased deterrence, because, of course, a key problem in this war since not just the past 2 years, but since 2014, is it's gradually escalating. So one of the key efforts has been on the Russian side, and now Belarus as well, is to establish a credible deterrent. So these nuclear weapons are definitely part of this deterrent.
Glenn, just about, I think it was a month and a half or max 2 months ago when these statements had come from Macron and David Cameron, both of them had mentioned, they had actually stated, David Cameron said it in as many words, that Ukraine has the right to defend itself, it can target inside Russia. Russia took that as a major escalation, and soon after that we heard of Belarus carrying out nuclear drills. If we were to just see the sequence of events in retrospect, was that a build-up to the announcement we're seeing now? And if this is the trend which follows, are we really looking at Belarus looking to use these nuclear weapons, and has Russia given a free hand to Belarus now to use them?
Well, I'm not sure. I can't tell if Russia's given a free hand, but that's the indication they're giving, and but that could be a part of the deterrent. But keep in mind, for context, during the Cold War, there was always an escalation ladder. So even if nuclear weapons would be used, NATO in these war games could strike, for example, Poland with nuclear weapons, as opposed to directly the Soviet Union, as a way of increasing the war, but without necessarily triggering nuclear Armageddon. Now, in the Atlantic magazine in 2016, members of Obama's national security team, they staged a war game, how to escalate if NATO would become involved in direct shooting war with Russia. So what would be the role of nuclear weapons? So they realized they couldn't strike inside Russia. However, the National Security Council of Obama, they recommended a nuclear attack on Belarus, even though if it had no involvement at all in the simulated conflict. And the reason why, and this is a quote, is because Belarus had the misfortune of being a Russian ally. So again, it's just a war game, but still. So this is how a natural step on the escalation ladder. One can have heavier weapon and attack allies and partners close by, which would not necessarily trigger a nuclear war. So it doesn't mean NATO is planning or US planning a nuclear strike on Belarus, but obviously attacking Belarus would be a way of, much like attacking Russia, without automatically triggering a response. So I think the nuclear weapons in the hands of Belarus, and implying that they have the right to use them as they see fit, I think this is obviously a way of trying to cement a proper deterrent.
The implication seems to be so. Now, Belarus' updated military doctrine passed by its parliament in April says that Minsk's ability to prevent military perils rests on the support of its allies. And no point for guessing, which nation is Belarus' biggest ally. Of course, first of all is Russia. How do you feel Russia will use this to its own advantage? Like you mentioned, that they can escalate without directly getting involved or triggering a counter by directly attacking a nation like Russia. But in this case, with a nation which is right next to, or you would call it Russia's backyard, how do you feel Russia could use that to its own advantage?
Well, it's not only Russia's backyard. Keep in mind, Russia and Belarus, they're part of the same union state. So they are very, very close, and they're part of many of the same institutions. In a few days, Belarus might even join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So, but as you mentioned, this is one of the pathways of escalation. Keep in mind, first, they give weapons to strike Russia, but they say, oh, it's inside Ukraine, they have the right for self-defense. Then they're striking inside Russia, but saying, yeah, again, this is a Ukrainian war. It's nothing to do with us, even though the Americans are the ones supplying the weapons, doing the target picking and also programming the missiles. And now, of course, there's this idea that, we could attack Russia's ally, which is Belarus. Now, Russia could, of course, use this to its own advantage by possibly hitting back against a NATO target, for example, Poland, because this main conflict is between Poland and Belarus now. They're the one loggerhead. So Russia could, of course, use Belarus also as a proxy if it would want to. I don't see that as being very likely. I think Russia's trying to keep the waters as calm as possible as they see that the war is going their way. So I think this is mostly a deterrent, which is also why they're pointing out the nuclear missiles in Belarus are tactical. That is, their battlefield nuclear weapons, not strategic, which are aimed at taking out large cities. But the war is escalating. It's just worth pointing out that the European security architecture is melting down and we're heading toward war. So the deterrent now is utmost important.
Glenn, just one more point. I wanted to just get your thoughts on this. Now, the first presidential debate which just took place recently in the US, we all understand the kind of press that the Biden camp has attracted towards itself after seeing the way Biden conducted the debate and, of course, seeing Trump. When you see both of them in the same frame, understandably, they're both not the youngest. One is 81, one is 78, but still Trump does come across as being far more attentive, far more accurate in terms of, far more snappy in terms of his responses as well. I'm not talking about other aspects, but simply about the Ukrainian aspect. It did come up in the middle. Do you feel with Trump's chances kind of going up and a little bit of a doubt within the Democrats, if Trump comes to power, how do you see this war going out?
Well, it's hard to say. Trump is a bit of a wild card, and he's president before, and he only escalated. So it's really hard to say. But so far, his arguments has been leaning towards, and also has been giving interviews suggesting that he would be willing to take NATO expansion off the table. And of course, restoring Ukraine's neutrality is really at the core of this war. So he could sit with the key of how to resolve this conflict. But of course, his path to peace solutions is always max pressure on all parts to do as they're told. So I'm not sure how his diplomacy would actually work.
It reminds me of what Putin had said, that, for him, it doesn't matter who comes to power, whether it's Trump or Biden. But he said that Biden is more predictable. So, of course, somebody at that stature, they know what they're talking about. And in very few words, they give out messages. But, of course, we will be tracking that closely as and when it plays out. That was Glenn Diesen joining us from Oslo, Professor of International Relations, University of Southeastern Norway. Always a pleasure speaking with you, Glenn.
Thank you, Shivan.